You saw the pleather vest absolutely everywhere this season, layered over a turtleneck in every store window, on every scroll through your phone, worn by every stylish woman in every photo you happen to come across. And it looked genuinely effortless on every single person wearing it, without exception, every single time. So you finally decided to buy one for yourself, convinced by everything you'd seen. You got it home, layered it the exact same way you'd seen it worn everywhere, and something about it just didn't sit right on you at all. Not bad exactly, nothing dramatic or embarrassing, just not the polished, elongated look you were genuinely expecting to see in that mirror. A little boxier than you'd hoped, a little shorter somehow than you actually are in real life. Here's something genuinely worth knowing before we go any further together. A pleather vest behaves completely differently on a petite frame than it does on the model or mannequin it was originally designed around, and almost nobody ever explains why. Because the actual reasons are entirely about proportion, not about taste or styling skill at all. This video is specifically and intentionally made for petite women over 60 who genuinely want this particular trend to actually work in their favor for once, not quietly and invisibly against them. We're going through 6 real practical checks together: length relative to your own torso, the fit at your shoulder and armhole, how layering thickness changes the whole silhouette entirely, whether to wear it open or closed, how it interacts with whatever you happen to be wearing underneath it. And finally, one whole body test that ties all 5 of those separate checks together and tells you, at a single glance, whether the vest is genuinely working for your own proportions or quietly working against them instead, every time you put it on. This isn't a promise that any single vest will genuinely make you taller or somehow permanently change your actual body proportions in any real way. It's simply a practical, honest way to understand why the exact same trending piece can look completely different on you than it did hanging in that store window, or draped so effortlessly on that particular model in the first place. And the very last check of all, the one we're deliberately saving for the very end, is the single one that finally lets you evaluate any vest at all, this one or the next one you happen to find, in a matter of seconds, without ever needing anyone else to tell you whether it genuinely actually works for your own body. 6 checks, 1 final master test, and by the very end of this video, you'll never have to wonder again whether a trending piece like this one is actually working in your favor or quietly working against you instead. Let's start right now, together, with the very first thing to check: exactly where the hem of that vest actually lands on your own particular body, before we move on to anything else at all. Number 6. The vest length to torso mistake. Picture the vest hanging neatly on the hanger in the store, or draped perfectly on the mannequin in the window display. The length looked genuinely proportional there, sitting at a natural, flattering point along the body. Now picture that exact same vest on you instead, at home, standing in your own mirror. That identical length can suddenly land somewhere entirely different on your body, because the hanger, the mannequin, and the model it was originally designed around are almost certainly taller than you are, with a considerably longer torso to work with from the very start. Here's what actually happens once you put it on. A vest hem that lands neatly at the hip on an average or taller frame can land considerably lower down on a petite torso instead, extending well past the natural waist and cutting straight across the widest part of the hip rather than skimming past it. That single specific landing point does something very particular. It visually shortens your entire torso from top to bottom, making your legs look considerably shorter by comparison, even though absolutely nothing about your actual physical proportions has changed at all in reality. The genuine fix here isn't avoiding vests entirely or giving up on the trend altogether. It's simply checking exactly where that hem lands on your own particular body before you ever commit to buying it. A shorter vest, one that stops at or slightly above your natural waist, keeps your torso looking its full length and lets your legs do the visual work of elongating you. A longer vest can still work, but only if it continues well past the hip, essentially becoming a second layer rather than stopping at that awkward in-between point. Try this simple test at home before you decide anything. Put the vest on and look in a genuine full-length mirror, not just from the waist up the way most bathroom mirrors force you to. Notice specifically where the hem sits relative to your own natural waistline and hip. If it lands in that middle zone, right at the widest part of your hip, that's very likely part of what feels off. Once you genuinely understand where your own hem should actually land on your body, the next question becomes just as important to answer: how the vest actually fits at your shoulder, which is exactly where we're headed together next. Number 5. The armhole and shoulder width mistake. Here's a small but genuinely important detail almost nobody actually checks before buying. Exactly how the vest fits at your shoulder and armhole specifically, as opposed to how it happens to fit everywhere else on your body. Most standard sizing charts build the armhole opening around one average shoulder width, and on a genuinely smaller frame, that same standard opening can sit noticeably wider than your actual shoulder, leaving visible gaps at the sides that show whatever you happen to be wearing underneath in a way that was never actually intended by the design. This creates one very specific, recognizable problem. Instead of skimming your shoulder cleanly the way it should, the fabric droops slightly downward at the armhole, adding unwanted visual bulk right at the very top of your silhouette. Exactly the spot where you genuinely want a clean, defined line the most. It's subtle, which is exactly why it's so often overlooked, but it's also one of the fastest ways a vest can start looking like it belongs to someone else's body rather than your own. The genuine correction here isn't necessarily buying a smaller overall size, since that particular move can easily create its own separate problems elsewhere on the garment. It's specifically checking the armhole on its own, independent of everything else about the fit. Raise your arms slightly while wearing the vest and notice whether the armhole gapes open or stays close to your body. A well-fitted armhole should move with you without excess fabric bunching or drooping. If the gap is significant, some pleather vests can be tailored at the shoulder seam relatively easily, since it's a simple, contained adjustment. If tailoring genuinely isn't an option for you, look specifically for styles labeled as fitted or petite cut instead, which are built around a narrower shoulder span from the very start. Once the shoulder finally sits correctly on your own frame, the vest stops looking borrowed from someone else entirely and genuinely starts looking like it was actually made specifically for you. But even with a genuinely perfect shoulder fit achieved, what you choose to layer underneath the vest can still quietly undo everything you've just fixed. Which brings us directly to the very next check. Number 4. The layering thickness mistake. Here's a genuine contradiction almost nobody ever names directly out loud. A pleather vest is specifically meant to be worn as a layering piece over something else, but pleather itself simply doesn't compress or drape the way soft knit fabric naturally does. And that particular mismatch becomes especially visible on a smaller frame, where any extra volume has considerably less room to distribute itself evenly before it starts looking like actual unwanted bulk, instead of deliberate, intentional styling. Layer a pleather vest over a thick cable knit sweater, for example, and the structured, fairly stiff outer layer combined with that bulky inner layer underneath can genuinely double your visible width right through the entire torso area. On a taller frame, that same extra volume genuinely has more overall length to spread itself across, and often reads as cozy or entirely intentional rather than accidental. On a petite frame instead, that identical combination can overwhelm your proportions completely, making your whole midsection look considerably wider and shorter at the exact same time. This doesn't mean giving up layering altogether. It means matching the thickness of what's underneath to the structure of the vest itself. A pleather vest, which already adds its own visual weight through the material, generally pairs better with a thinner base layer, something like a fitted turtleneck or a lightweight sweater, rather than anything bulky or oversized. Try out this simple comparison for yourself at home. Put the vest on directly over your usual thick sweater first and look carefully in the mirror. Then swap that sweater out for something noticeably thinner instead and put the exact same vest back on over it once more. Notice how much cleaner the silhouette reads, how the vest itself becomes visible as a shape again instead of disappearing into a mass of fabric. The vest was always genuinely meant to add structure to your outfit, not compete directly against it for attention. Get that base layer right underneath, and the vest can finally do the exact job it was originally designed to do. But even with the right layering, one more decision changes the entire picture, whether to wear it open or fastened closed. Number 3. The closure style mistake. Most general styling advice out there treats open versus closed as nothing more than a matter of personal taste. On a genuinely petite frame, though, it's actually a structural decision that changes your entire visual line from top to bottom, and treating it as pure preference alone is exactly why so many women end up wearing it the exact way that works against them, without ever realizing it. A fully closed and buttoned vest presents your entire torso as one solid, unbroken block of fabric running from shoulder all the way down to hem. On a longer torso, that block has enough length to read as intentional and structured. On a shorter torso, that same solid block can visually compress the space between your shoulders and your hips, making your whole midsection look shorter and wider at once, since there's nothing breaking up that horizontal mass. An open vest instead does something entirely different visually. It creates two clean vertical edges running down your front, and those two distinct lines draw the eye up and down through the center of your body naturally, rather than pulling it sideways across your width. This vertical movement is especially valuable on a petite frame, where every inch of visual length matters more than it does on a taller frame with length to spare. This genuinely doesn't mean you should never close the vest at all. If you happen to have a longer torso relative to your overall height, or you're wearing something underneath with a strong vertical pattern already built in, wearing it closed can still work perfectly well for you. The actual test here is genuinely simple. Try wearing the vest both ways in front of a full-length mirror, one after the other, and honestly notice which version makes your torso look longer overall rather than shorter. For most petite frames overall, wearing it open over a simple, unpatterned base layer tends to be the more reliably flattering choice by far, letting those vertical lines genuinely do their intended work properly. Once you understand this, you're not just picking a style at random. You're making a decision based on what actually elongates you. Number 2, the proportion to bottom mistake. Here's something genuinely worth considering that has almost nothing to do with the vest itself and everything to do with what's actually happening below it, on the rest of your body. The hem of your vest and the hem of whatever you're wearing on your lower body, whether that's pants or a skirt, create a visual relationship whether you plan for it or not. When those two separate hemlines happen to land too close together, they read visually as one single continuous block rather than as two genuinely distinct layers working together. This is especially easy to miss because you're checking the vest and the bottom separately in the mirror, never really looking at the gap between them as its own element. On a petite frame, that missing gap can eliminate one of the few opportunities you have to create visible length in an outfit. Think of it this specific way for a moment. A vest ending right at your natural waist, paired with high-rise pants underneath, creates almost no visible torso showing between the two pieces at all, collapsing what could otherwise have been a genuinely elongating vertical space. That same vest instead paired with a slightly lower rise, or with the vest tucked strategically at the front only, opens up a small but genuinely meaningful gap that reads clearly as intentional proportion rather than as a simple accident. Check this for yourself by looking closely at your own reflection and specifically identifying exactly where the vest ends and exactly where your bottoms actually begin. Is there a visible gap of fabric, even just a few inches, or do the two pieces essentially touch? If they touch, try adjusting the rise of what you happen to be wearing underneath, or experiment with a front-only tuck to reintroduce that missing space. This is genuinely a small adjustment to make. But it's very often the actual difference between an outfit that photographs is put together and polished and one that reads is slightly off somehow, without you ever quite knowing exactly why that is. Number 1, the full-length vertical line test. Everything we've covered so far has genuinely been one separate decision at a time. Length, shoulder fit, layering thickness, open versus closed, and the gap below the hem. Each one genuinely matters quite a lot entirely on its own. But checking each of them one at a time in a mirror, close up and piece by piece, isn't actually how anyone else in the real world ever sees your finished outfit. They see it all at once instead, from a normal distance as one complete whole silhouette. Here's the actual master check that finally ties everything together into one simple habit. Put on the complete outfit, vest fully included, and step back far enough to see your entire body reflected in a full-length mirror, exactly the way someone greeting you from across a room actually would see you. Don't examine each detail separately, just look at the overall shape first. Ask yourself just one simple, honest question at that point. Does this whole silhouette genuinely read as one long, continuous line, or does it read instead as clearly broken up into separate, visible horizontal sections? If your eye catches on a hard stopping point, whether that's the vest hem, the layering underneath, or the gap below it, that's your answer. That's the exact detail to revisit from everything we've covered. This particular test genuinely works because it mimics real life so closely. Nobody evaluates you piece by piece the way you might in a mirror while getting dressed. They see the whole picture instantly, the same way you're seeing it now standing back from the mirror. Once you genuinely start checking your outfits this way from now on, you stop needing to memorize 5 entirely separate rules every single time you get dressed in the morning. You simply step back once, look honestly at the whole line, and adjust the single thing that's actually breaking it. That's the entire complete system, and it genuinely applies to this vest, the next one you happen to try on, and honestly, most other layering pieces you'll ever own in the future. You already have everything you need to judge it entirely for yourself instantly without ever having to guess again. Conclusion. So the next time you reach for a trending piece like this pleather vest, remember it was genuinely never about whether the trend itself works or not. It was always about whether it works specifically for your own individual proportions, and now you finally know exactly what to check before you buy. Length against your own torso, fit at your shoulder, weight underneath, open or closed, the gap below the hem, and finally the whole silhouette viewed from a genuine distance. 6 small, simple checks that turn any vest at all, this one included, from something that quietly fights your own frame into something that genuinely, reliably flatters it instead. Tell us in the comments below which of these 6 surprised you the very most, and if this genuinely changed how you'll shop for your next layering piece, go ahead and subscribe. There is more of this waiting for you right here.